My name is Sean Dooley. I am going to lead you through this happiness session, and by the end we'll all be holding hands and singing Kumbaya, I'm sure. This is the final in a series of, I guess, emotional nights. The previous two, over the previous two nights, have been sad and angry, and I'm quite relieved to be talking about happy. And also glad to know, interestingly, that that the numbers, the bookings before the weather were the highest for happy. So clearly Melburnians want happiness in their lives. I think it's very interesting that currently Sydney is about to do the Festival of Dangerous Ideas. They need to prove that they have ideas and that they can be dangerous. Whereas Melbourne, the city of black, oh yes, Dev is the odd one out here. The rebel. Clearly we're seeking happiness in our lives, and I, in my extensive and thorough research for this evening, I went to the only source that one needs to look at now. I did a Google search and for the terms of happy, sad and angry, and there are there are 890 million hits on Google just for the term sad. For the term angry, there's 523 million. And for the term happy, there are 2.82 billion hits. So clearly happiness, I suspect, because Google can't lie, is that happiness is something very, very important in all of our lives. Before I introduce our panellists, I'll just talk briefly about, hopefully set up the situation. While he was out here for the Melbourne Writers' Festival, author Jonathan Franzen spoke to Margaret Throsby on ABC Classic FM, and in that interview he said that it was the actual year that he took to write each of his novels that he felt were the happiest years of his life. He said, "I feel a little while like I have a reason to exist, that I'm doing the thing that I was put on the earth to do." But then he also said in another interview that he was never truly happy until he discovered bird watching. Now, as a rampant, addicted bird watcher myself, I can totally identify with this. And I can also confirm that having taken Jonathan out bird watching to Werribee Sewage Farm, a place that I don't ironically refer to as the happiest place on earth, because for me it truly is. I love the smell of sewage in the morning. His birdwatching claims were not frivolous. He, having discovered this form of pure happiness, he was clearly desperate for another hit. And despite his protestations that he wasn't a mad twitcher interested in seeing new birds for his list, we literally had to drag him kicking and screaming away from Werribee Sewage Farm, from the ponds, begging for, "I just want one more sweet, sweet avocet." That got me to wondering, can our pursuit of the things that make us happy actually only lead to a futile world of unhappiness? And I think I don't have the answers. Hopefully the people here today have such answers for us. And I'd like to introduce three people who I'm extremely happy to be sharing a stage with. The first is Anne Manne, who is a Melbourne writer whose works I'm always happy to read, because even when she writes on topics that I wouldn't naturally think I would be interested in, her writing contains such elegance and intelligence and humanity that I find myself absorbed to the very end. Some of Anne's works include the Quarterly essay Love and Money, the Family and the Free Market, a memoir, So This Is Life, Scenes from a Country Childhood, and Motherhood, How We Should Care for Our Children. And she's been a regular contributor to The Australian, though perhaps not in the immediate future, The Age and The Monthly, with essays on many aspects of contemporary life. Anne has also written a response to David Malouf's quarterly essay on happiness, and is currently writing a book that's concerned with our culture's narcissism. Jonathan Daly is an urbanist and behaviour change consultant with a focus on the human, social and cultural capital of our cities. I wish that when I was at school I knew what course it was that you could do to become an urbanist, because it is the coolest title ever. Not to be confused with an urbanista. That one vowel changes radically the meaning. The addition of that one vowel turns you from a man that all women desire and men envy into a stripy t-shirt sipping a latte in a science lab beaker made from coffee beans excreted by a meerkat. Jonathan is the team leader for behavioural change and sustainability at GHD, where much of the current focus of his work is on how the psychology of urban design and the sensory experience of the city affects our daily happiness. And our final panellist is Catherine Deveny. Catherine is a columnist, comedian and author of several books, including It's Not My Fault They Print Them, Free to a Good Home, and Babies, Bellies and Blundstones, which we used as a baby rearing Bible in our house. And it hasn't, I'd like to say, Dev, that it hasn't affected our child at all. The wardens at her 3-year-old detention centre say that she smears her dinner over the wall very creatively, much more than the other kids. Over recent years, a lot of opinion has been expressed publicly about Catherine Deveny. As someone who has known her as a friend and sometime work colleague for the last 20 years, I was surprised that she was never described in all of that as ever described anywhere as happy. Because having shared a TV comedy writer's room, which is the most hellish abode of human misery and degradation known to man, I can say with absolute certainty that Dev is an absolute champion at bringing happiness into the lives of everyone that she comes into personal contact with. And like many great comedians, she too has battled the demons of depression, so has seen happiness from both sides. And her next one-woman show is going to be called Happiness and Offence, which I can't wait for. But I wanted to kick off the discussion tonight to maybe help us define what happiness is, because we could spend the whole hour talking about what we mean by happiness. But if I could get each of you to share with us, if you don't mind, the last time where you were happy, but where you actually had a moment where you paused and thought and realised that you were happy. I often wonder whether happiness is something we have in retrospect, that we think about afterwards. Oh, they were happy times. So if anyone wants to go first, or Kath.
Well, when you sent that out as a suggestion to start with, I was flooded with images of knowing I was happy and being very conscious of it, millions of memories. But I do know a couple of weeks ago that I actually tweeted, if you knew how happy I was, you'd slap me. And I'm not sure exactly where I was at that moment, but I think of it frequently. And one of the things is that I have had a lot of ups and downs, and not a lot, just what you'd expect. But I had a really horrible spinal injury over summer, and I've also gone through kind of emotional pain as well, and there is not a day that goes past when I'm not in physical and or emotional pain that I'm not amazed and thrilled and consciously go, I'm so happy that I'm through that and I'm not suffering that anymore. Because when you're in something which is just so impenetrable and so it just seems impossible that you're ever going to get out of, the fact that you've got out of it, you feel like you've bungee jumped and lived.
So for you, is happiness, and I've wondered this, is happiness about just the moments when you can strip away the anxiety, the fear, the conflict in your life, and happiness is actually our normal state, but it's layered with so many negatives. Our lives are layered with so many negatives. Would you think that's happiness for you, or is happiness something else, something more?
I think happiness is very different for different people and at different times. There is a saying that you're only ever as happy as your least happy child, and depending on where you are, like one of the things that I'm a bit fascinated is grief. You know, I know people who have lost children and lost loved ones, and how they can keep going and they can laugh and move forward. And they've all told me when I've talked to them at length that even at the moments after the most horrible thing has happened, there are these kind of moments of respite and happiness that you become aware of, whether you've been in a car accident and you're on the side of the road and someone brings you a blanket or offers you a cup of tea. So for me, I think that we all come with, predispositions which help you be more available to happiness, and their resilience, optimism, flexibility. In my case, it's very low expectations and no sense of entitlement whatsoever, which is true. I expect nothing, and I'm just so thrilled that that I'm not living in Rwanda, in a camp with, in a refugee camp. So I'm just amazed by that. So if you talk about, I think it does constantly change. And my mum, who doesn't really have much nice to say about me, she says, I always say about you, I say, if Catherine was told she'd be in a wheelchair, her first thought would be, great, I can pick whatever colour I want. So I think in my case, it's about flexibility and optimism, but it's not even something that I do on purpose. It's almost like when the situation changes, a different backdrop falls behind me, and so the framing is different and the expectations are different. So what is a win? So if I had a spinal injury and when I had my spinal injury, if I got through the day, being able to have a walk and only take 4 pills, that was a win. Yet there was other, days in my life, if I hadn't written 2 columns and run 10 kilometres and cooked a meal for 25 people and done a successful speaking gig, that was a loss. So I think that everything is quite relative, but the backdrops, I think, are something, and I'm not sure whether you can create that, but it's something that's in there, and it could possibly come from growing up in a very dysfunctional, very depressed family. There was a lot of depression, there was a lot of dysfunctional, and I suspect I may have developed a little spark which just always just kicks in like an overdrive, or almost like a thermostat, to keep me at a certain level.
Well, no, it's fascinating, and thank you for not answering specifically, because as I asked the question, I realised you're in a new relationship and this could have gone to a whole other place.
Yeah.
But Jonathan, are you able to remember the most recent time when you've had a moment where you've gone, I'm truly happy?
I mean, apart from meeting us.
Of course,
today.
yeah, after that. I think for me it's a very temporal and spatial thing. So I think happiness comes in little moments. I'm thinking immediately, I became an uncle for the 5th time very recently, and that's great. And I think we all get that. We get little shots of happiness that we go along on for a little while. But yeah, it's really little things. Like I think about, like I fairly recently decided I'm not taking takeaway coffee anymore. So in the morning, I'm going in, I'm sitting down, and I'm going to enjoy the coffee. And just in those moments, I've taken a little bit of time back for myself, and I really enjoy it. I get to clear my head for the day, think about what's coming up, and get ready for it. And the other kind of little moments where everything just seems perfect in the world, or normally when I'm in a nice public space and I'm just kind of people watching and just looking at the world and looking at the diversity of people, and it never ceases to amaze me, the diversity of people, and shapes, sizes, how we look, and so on and so forth.
I was going to ask you a bit later about urban planning in terms of a spatial sense, how it can aid our happiness, but that's something that hopefully we can come back to, that idea of temporal planning as well. In that, I'd be really intrigued to follow up that idea of that people say I'm too busy to be happy, and it's interesting you consciously take that moment to have that coffee and just sit. It sounds kind of quite heavenly, really. Anne, do you have a moment that you could share with us of just going,
I like that rider there that I can share. Well, I actually think when I kind of noticed it, as opposed to just the general state, was strangely enough after the event I think it was last week, with my husband Rob, who was here. He was doing a non-debate with someone who didn't turn up from the Australian. And I have to preface my remarks by saying that he'd been attacked the weekend before. He's actually done a quarterly essay called Bad News on the Australian newspaper. And the big question for us was whether or not we would survive this assault on the Australian. And so, and I'd really been quite anxious about what would happen to him over this. Anyway, so this whole 14,000 words was attacking him on the weekend, and then we had this event. Max Gillies decided to stand in for Paul Kelly, the senior editor at the Australian, and it was somehow just an incredibly good cultural event. It was a sense of people standing up together. There was a sense of solidarity. There was a sense of kind of attunement in the audience, that they understood what this battle was about. And I looked at him and I thought, actually, he has more than survived, as he looked so composed. But then we went off to dinner with the Black Ink people, who are his publishers, who were very good friends. And that's Maury Schwartz and Chris Fyke, a brilliant editor at Black Ink. And I just thought, here is an engagement with the political world, is an engagement with the world, but there is friendship, and there is, here's this a very close marriage in my case with Rob, and so here is a person who you absolutely love, who has survived something you thought might be really problematic for them. So I guess I'm telling you there something that, for me, it's central to my happiness, that other people close to me are happy. I identify with what Kath was saying about you're as happy as your least happy child, but I'd add, the rest of your extended family as your least happy animal, because I have a lot of animals. But those close attachments are really the centre of my life. But that a happy life does not necessarily... that difficulty and turmoil and struggle and even defamation is not separate from it necessarily. That difficulty can be a part of that life. You can still feel kind of joyous. Actually, that's something we might talk about later, because I think we need to distinguish between moments of joy, epiphany, and a more global state of happiness and contentment.
That's. I was just wondering on that, in terms of the palaver with the attack from the Australian. The studies that I've read have spoken about happiness, and also studies of longevity, saying that the subset of people in the community that seem to register the highest levels of happiness and the corresponding highest levels of longevity tend to be those with a firm faith in something, usually religious faith, but it can be some other some other thing that they latch onto, and the fact, and it may be in the terms of religious people that it's just they're not out drinking and smoking and having casual sex, so yes, they're going to live for longer and maybe not be enjoying themselves as much, but but I think it's seriously far more interesting in that they don't stress about that. It's almost they don't have that worry of examining their lives too much, because the answers are there for them, and so that their certitude in their beliefs sustains them and sustains a sense of community. But having seen those figures, it also strikes me as a paradox that it's often these the people at the extreme end of that, people who have a fundamentalist faith. They're always so angry. They seem to rail against... If they're so happy internally, why are they railing against the rest of the world? And do you think that's possible, that some people gain their sense of purpose in the world by being angry with everybody else?
Well, having read The Australian on the weekend, I would say yes. But, no. Look, I think you're onto something central, which is that happiness surely is to do with meaning. So it actually is not so much that you have to have a nice house, or you've got to have this or that. There's not particular elements, particularly of a material kind, but that you can find meaning in your life. And I think the most terrifying thing is not to have meaning, is to feel that your life has come to nothing in some way, or that you haven't, you don't have some project. Certainly in my case, if I have a project, then I'm completely happy. I identify very much with Jonathan Franzen's being lost to the world, either in writing or in something else, or in bird watching. But I think it's that the project of creating meaning and finding meaning. And in fact, to go back to something Kath said, which I thought was very perceptive in your opening remarks, that it's so interesting to observe people who go through great grief, but who can nonetheless keep kind of buoyant in some way, or keep not despairing. So there is something different between grief and unhappiness. There can be incredible suffering with grief, but and I'm thinking of that line from Isaac Dinesen, who said, "Every sorrow can be born if it's made into a story." And so that is a part of our capacity as human beings, to make a story out of that is to make meaning. And if we have a narrative, if we have something to tell about what has happened, it is possible to draw meaning from it and to survive it. So that's, I think the pursuit of happiness abstracted from a sense of being able to absorb and encounter real difficulty is a pretty empty and ultimately elusive concept.
It leads on. Kath, I was wondering if you wouldn't mind approaching this area, because I know you're always brutally honest about yourself, and I'm sure you won't mind going there, but you have had...
I have no idea what you're going to ask me, Dools, but I'm open.
Well, remember that night at... anyway...
Look,
yes.
let's not.
You have had... your own personal battles with depression. I sound like Dr. Phil at the moment, but has that experience allowed you to appreciate the moment, your happy moments in your life more?
Yeah, it's funny, kind of the intro to that. See, I just kind of see it as something fairly normal, and most people who I know don't even think of me as suffering depression, even close to me, even when I explain what's going on, because of the way that I cope with it. I kind of throw energy at it and stuff. But I'm used to it in the same way that I'm used to the weather in Melbourne. That, and this is my take. For me, on depression, it's like when I'm happy, and when the black dog hits me, I know that I'll be happy soon again. So I'm not at all kind of fussed, and I know when fishermen don't go to prepare, when fishermen can't go to sea, they repair their nets. And so I just see it as I'm kind of working on other things. I don't think that you can live a kind of a big, vivid, messy, emotional, intellectual, creative, psychological and family life without going to those extremes. And I don't really want to. I'm not going to say that it's because of that I can live on, that I can live on the other side. The way that I live, I'm older now. I'm 43. I know, it's hard to believe. I use a cream. My emotions have become far more letterboxed. When a psychologist I saw for a while, I had a kind of a midlife crisis around my 40th birthday. I know, cliche. I had a really good therapist for 2 years, and I had to let him go. He wasn't kind of getting anywhere. And he said that I was technically what was called an hysteric. And what we were trying to do was to make me a symptomless hysteric, which apparently I am now. But I'm not fussed. I think
something quite tragic in that.
It is.
I'm screaming on the inside.
But no, I'm just screaming all the time. But I think for me to be able to integrate the reality of depression into my life has just been to be very honest with it and to kind of let it in, to be constantly doing stuff all the time as a prophylactic, and when it hits, not to push it away but to kind of let it stay with you and to just go, it's okay. there's a bit of a struggle, like, why am I feeling like this? This is really crazy. I've got no problems. There's no, and then you kind of feel yourself go under. But it doesn't really last long. It only, like the other day, it kind of happened. And my boyfriend said, look, it only ever lasts 24 hours. But I go right under. And I just don't feel like I can ever come out. It's just this, you feel, joints are rusty, body's leaden, head is foggy, and then you kind of come up again. So what was the question? Did I answer it?
Sort of. I guess in a nub, it's whether does the moments of happiness in your life, the times when you're happy, feel all the more sweeter, or do you appreciate them more?
I think I feel things fairly keenly in myself and in others. So it's just my emotional palette and my kind of landscape which I'm used to traversing, in the same way that all people have stuff, whether they suffer migraines, whether they've got a dodgy knee, or whether they have hay fever, or I'm sure that what I have classified as depression, 1 in 5 people suffer depression, and it's not on the increase. It's just that we're just getting better at kind of diagnosing it now and dealing with it and not kind of pushing it away. That despite the fact that I carry that with me, and I've never had to take any pills or anything like that, I've just dealt with it with writing and kind of self-talk, a little bit of therapy for a while, and all that kind of stuff. But it did make the extremes bigger. And we were this morning in our email conversation, I think that one of the things that I've found, a few things that I found helpful, and it was through depression that I found those things. The Buddhists say that depression is a gift, and I haven't done enough reading, but it kind of makes sense to me. It does give you a moment to pause and think and address things inside you. But one of the things that I say a lot is this is just how it is now. Feelings pass. Ooh. I think we were just hit by lightning. That was God. Feelings and emotions change. Feelings are not fact. And nothing is ever as good or as bad as you think it's ever going to be. And so and there's another great saying, it's a Zen saying, which if I was going to get a tattoo, it would probably be this, which is, you can't stop the waves, but you can learn to surf. So if you don't think of happiness, and I'd love to discuss the difference between happiness and joy, because I don't really know what it is. But if you think of kind of happiness as this kind of ultimate default setting that we should all be at all of the time, I don't think that that's kind of helpful. I think that we've got to realise that you can't stop the waves, but you can learn to surf, and that we're going to have all of these things that we have to deal with, and we all need a kind of an emotional tool belt, sorry about the dodgy words, it's the only thing I can think of, to deal with wherever we're at. And it's really helpful if we can share that with other people too, because they might find something useful in your toolkit that could help them.
Well, maybe that's where we should take the discussion now, is that to talk about the difference between happiness and joy. Are we talking about completely different concepts here? Does anybody have any further thoughts on that?
Look, the reason I raised it is that I wouldn't think of my childhood, for various reasons, as a happy one, but it was an intensely joyous one. So that even though there were all sorts of difficulties swirling around me, parents and mental illness and all sorts of things, there was nonetheless moments of intense joy. And the first time I really recognised that was when I read a very short book by Virginia Woolf called Moments of Being, and she was talking about this sort of epiphanous, revelatory moment where you suddenly feel that you can see the world in a way that is revelatory, that you suddenly understand how things tick, how things work, and that has a force of a shock, of a revelation to you, and there's a kind of joyousness in it, in kind of understanding somehow how part of the puzzle of, in this case, childhood came together. It was often on the back of a horse, it was often on the back of them galloping fast, it was through the bush, it was part of nature, so that those moments of joy were not part of what I'd think is more usually thought of as happiness, which is a more baseline kind of contentment. And David Malouf, I think, is using in that sort of lovely essay he wrote on the quarterly essay on happiness. He's using that sense of contentment. So I think even when people are quite unhappy, even when people are depressed, they can still have those moments of absolute intensity of aliveness, where you feel in every fibre of your being, the absolute joy of being alive.
So what happiness is more an acceptance. I was about to say joyful acceptance, but an acceptance of being. Would you sort of say that a comfortableness with your existence?
Yeah, I would think of it. I might be wrong here, so people can disagree. But I think of it more as a more general state of contentment, so that you are not actually constantly struggling with all sorts of things which are very difficult to grapple with. So it's a milder sentiment in a way. To be honest, it almost doesn't interest me that much. If I'm really honest, it doesn't interest me that much. Living intensely interests me. Being joyous, loving intensely interests me. So things that are really, even if it's being passionate about a football team, whatever. So intensity in people interests me. The kind of mildness of contentment, it doesn't really.
Jonathan, you're nodding vigorously there.
Yeah, I think I'd like to change my first question. I think what I was describing were moments of joy. Whereas happiness is probably more, for me, about being in a state of balance in your life. I think we're always in this flux between how unhappy we are and how happy, or how depressed we are and how happy we are. And I'd suggest maybe 4 to 5 of people actually suffer depression, and the one that doesn't is the odd person. And I think, as Ricky Gervais said recently or a little while back, that if you didn't come from a dysfunctional family, then you didn't come from a normal family. And I think that makes a lot of sense. So I think in life, it's all about trying to find balance. Happiness is finding that balance. I think, unfortunately, kind of since the industrial age, we've kind of been forced into these jobs that are very repetitive and very boring, and just suck the life out of everyone, their creativity, their energy. So if you go to universities, I was in Monash recently and met some absolutely amazing kids there, just full of ideas and ready to attack the world. And then they get out into the world, into the reality of it, and into the workplace, and the workplace just sucks that life out of them. So they don't, they don't have direction, they don't have that meaning. And I think a lot of people are doing jobs that just aren't letting them express themselves, and aren't letting them find meaning in life. And it doesn't have to be, meaning doesn't have to be profound. It can be as simple as just doing something good for society and getting something back from that. So I think it's about balance.
Yeah, I was want to pick up on a couple of things you said there. This afternoon, when the first thunderstorm hit, I was standing on a street corner in Carlton, and I love extreme weather. It just makes you feel alive to be out in it, whether it's a 44-degree day with a hot northwesterly wind that just burns your synapses and soft tissues, or whether it's something like today with that the sky darkened to an apocalyptic grey, and then the thunder and lightning and the rain hit. And I was sheltering outside a convenience store and sort of feeling alive, but then kind of thankful that I had an awning that could keep me out of this. And I was also very happy to know that engineers have been smart enough to work out, as I watched the water disappear into a drain and be taken away, hopefully somewhere to like Werribee, where all the birds will use it later. But I actually it struck me about how, on the one hand, I feel alive in that extreme weather event. On the other hand, the cocooning of modern society prevents me from fully experiencing that, but also gives me a sense of safety or possibly happiness there. Can you sort of talk about the sort of stuff that you do in terms of the way we design our cities, and are our cities conducive to human happiness, or are they just are we sort of butting our heads against literal walls?
Yeah, I guess the work that I do it's around behaviour change. And it's probably awful language, but we can't think of anything better to describe it, unfortunately.
It sort of has an Orwellian
yes,
to it.
Yes, it sounds very manipulative. But I always use the subtext that it's about building capacity for change, and really the change that people want for a better quality of life. So, for example, with cities, unfortunately, the greatest cause of misery in cities, in my opinion, is the car, because the car has led to the vast urban sprawl that we have now. And in my opinion, if you look at Melbourne as a city, it's a city for about 8 k's or so from the centre, and after that it just becomes a very kind of bland suburban nightmare almost. I would hate to live there. For me, cities work when you've a lot of people brought close together. You've lots of opportunities for contact, opportunities for conversation, opportunities for, and from that I think comes innovation and comes creativity. And comes all the wonderful things that we associate with cities, but the car has kind of helped us push people apart and further apart and further apart, and Melbourne's a great example. I think if you look at within those kind of 8 k's, you've got this wonderfully vibrant and creative city, and that peters out quite significantly when you get outside that area.
I feel really depressed now. I'm no longer happy because I live outside that 8k. I live in Cottlesbridge, which is just below Kinglake, where all the bushfires happen. But I also I actually wonder at the idea that suburban life is so terrible for people. I love the inner city. I come out and I do feel energised, and I enjoy it immensely. I see all that creativity, and there's something inspiring about it. But having watched other people and raised children out in the sticks, out in the outer suburban rim, I think that they live lives of meaning. I think they work incredibly hard on behalf of their children. I think they have aesthetics which are often very different to mine. I think there's a way in which I think that living in the inner city you can feel that it's a whole other world there, but it actually has surprisingly similar resonances for people in the way they live their life. In my observation of people as they struggled with raising their children and went through all of that, as when I worked in the enterprise of parenting alongside those people, I could see far more common elements with the entirety of Melbourne than I would see differences.
So it's not a case perhaps that there's pockets of community in the terms that Jonathan's talking about, spread throughout.
Well, I agree with Jonathan about the design of Melbourne. I think it's a disaster. I think we're growing too quickly. I agree with your point about the nature of work now. I think it's often extremely isolating in your little cubicle, and the sort of sense of the call centre and your relationship to a disembodied voice somewhere and so on. So I agree with many of those points. It's just that I do think there's a sense within those who live in that inner city, which I find, because I live out, we actually live in a rural area, but nonetheless you have a lot to do with the outer suburban rim, and it's often is looked down upon, and there's a part of me who stood alongside all of those other mums at the school gate, and I raised my hand in protest. Can I just say that with the whole idea of happiness, I just want to say something about depression and the way we see the world. There's a lot of studies show that if someone's mildly depressed, they actually have a more accurate view of reality than someone who is very happy. So because we allow our to be happy, we kind of have to, it seems, distort our sense of reality a little bit. So we kind of let ourselves off the hook and those around us. And I don't know if people have seen The Castle, the movie. So that would be the father is kind of, his wife puts a bowl of ice cream and he says, "What is this? You're such a brilliant cook." And she said, "It's ice cream, darling." So and then he will say, "Yes, but it's what you do with it." She sticks a spoon in it. So there's a way in which he's transforming reality all the time to be better than it actually is. And he and that's the theme of the whole movie. But nonetheless, depression itself holds obviously some accuracy of, not if you get really depressed, I don't think that holds any longer, because then you have an extremely distorted vision of the world where everything seems black. And if I may just continue that theme a little bit, I read a fascinating article about Abraham Lincoln, and it was by someone who was now written a kind of psychological biography of him. But what he was saying was that actually Abraham Lincoln suffered from depression. But instead of saying the usual kind of thing, which is, look, he suffered from depression, but he got over it and he surmounted it, and the narrative of kind of survival and, moving onwards always, that very familiar phrase to all of us, just move on. In fact, because he suffered from depression, he had a kind of emotional entry point into seeing the way the slaves actually lived. That he had a way of seeing that did not distort, in the way that the very plain bowl of ice cream was made into a rich dessert. He could not distort that world, and he actually saw far more accurately than those around him who were not depressed. So what this writer said was that it was because of his depression, not despite it. So, in other words, the way we see the world doesn't, when you said all those hits on happiness, and there is a way in which, of course, nobody wants to be depressed, but maybe states of mind that we have when we are depressed are a part of seeing the world in its fullness, rather than seeing just one aspect of it. Just one, the kind of... I have to say, my mother is often quite negative about things, but often very witty and sharp. And my aunt was always incredibly sort of optimistic, and she'd send these letters about hibiscuses and sunsets, and, it was extremely positive. So I was once sitting with them in an airport, and my aunt, who's sort of, was always the sunny one, was holding forth, and then my mother was sort of slightly puncturing what she said. But I thought I would be so bored had the mothers been reversed, and this was because my mother's perception of things was actually pretty accurate, and kind of sharp.
This is we're going to have questions in a few minutes, but it might be a good place for us to try and wrap things up, which is I was hoping we'd head for, is that idea is happiness actually something that we really need to be striving for? And what you were saying reminded me, and I recently, Jonathan, for 20 years I've lived in that 8-kilometre bubble, inner city bubble, and loved it. And just a month ago I've moved into the middle suburbs. And I went back to the inner city Russian bakery that you can't get good bread in our suburbs. So I went back there recently, and for the first time since in the 6 years that I've been going to that bakery, I actually saw the Russian woman smile, because I walked in, and as I went to whip my sunglasses off, it got jagged in my eye, and I kind of did a bit of a slapstick manoeuvre, and she smiled. I said, "Oh, it's good to see you smile." And we got talking about that, and she said something like, "Why do you smile all the time? You just look like an idiot for smiling for no reason." And it was like, well, she's got a point. And I think that's something that you're saying, Anne, is the pursuit of happiness creating the seeds of our own unhappiness, because it's something that
exactly.
Happiness is actually about being in the moment rather than trying to... It's not about finding moments of joy, it's finding moments of reality.
I'm thinking a lot of people will talk about, happiness in their children, and I've always said I don't want my children to be happy. I have no interest in them being happy. I want them to be brave and resilient and optimistic and flexible and tolerant. Happiness will kind of come if they're able to do those things. But I am not under any illusion that I can make them happy. I can try to equip them with things to give them the ability to surf when the waves come and when the tsunami comes, and maybe when they don't have a surfboard, and maybe when they need a boogie board, and maybe when they should have had a jet ski. So I agree. I don't think we should be striving towards happiness. I think, and you use that word meaning, which I'm going to be thinking about that for weeks, whatever meaning is, but or purpose. But I think it is about bravery, resilience, optimism, and flexibility and creativity. I think that people think about creativity as something which has only got to do with the arts. It's got to do with the way that you think. And I think that that's more important than anything else, if we can teach people to frame things in different ways, and also to set a good example. That doesn't mean being perfect all the time. It means showing others how you can get to the best possible place with the least amount of damage, no matter how bad it is.
Jonathan, what's your take after this 45 minutes or so on happiness? Is it something that we should be prioritising, or is it something, are other things actually more important?
I think I agree a lot with what's been said. I don't think it's something we should be pursuing. I think we pursue it because we have a very skewed understanding of what happiness is and what it really means. So, you go to school and you're told that, you must achieve and you can't fail. So you must get into university, you must get a degree, you must get a good job, you must get a big car, you must get a big house, and somewhere along the line, happiness comes. Rather than, teaching the kids that failure is actually a good thing and you learn more from failure than you do from success. And setting people out on the right road to understanding, that what it takes to achieve that balance between the two. So it's not something that's in the future that you're striving for. It's something that's in the moment.
Well, I guess we'll see whether we've failed or achieved tonight with any of the questions from the audience. But before I take questions, I'd just like to thank the panellists preemptively. Could you thank for what's been a fascinating discussion, and Jonathan and Catherine? And is there anything? We already have a hand. That's good. Thank you, sir. Yes.
I'm just curious about the panel's reaction to what I feel is a sort of scourge of modern living at supermarkets and banks, where they gleefully ask you, "How's your day?" How would the panel react to those sorts of questions?
I go to a small supermarket near my house where I know all the people, and I actually tell them exactly how my day is and find out about theirs. So I'm quite happy, but I have a 13-year-old son who hates it, hates the small talk, doesn't know why people do it, thinks it's patronising, doesn't feel like he has to respond to it. The other day he was asked by a well-meaning adult who he'd just met, "So what school do you go to?" And Dominic's response was, "What difference does it make?" And we were at Slut Walk, and we argued the whole way home about small talk, and I don't want to do small talk, I don't want to do big talk, but sometimes you have to do the small talk to get to the big talk. I know that my mother has suffered very serious depression for quite some time and has gone through a lot of trauma, like a house burning down and a whole lot of other horrible things, and she would say that sometimes those moments of a stranger asking her how she was, even if it just was at the supermarket checkout, were like the light in her day. So for every 500 people that might give the shits to, for that one person who is feeling like that they're invisible and that they're lost and that there's no one that cares, I'm quite happy to put up with it for that.
I've got to say, coming from Ireland, it's a very nice change. Because customer service back home is absolutely appalling. So they don't even speak to you, they just look at you with a very depressed
my biggest problem with supermarkets is the that they've stopped all the checkout people and re-employed them to hand you a shopping trolley at the start. And I can get the shopping trolley. I need somebody to do that. There's somebody up the back. Yes.
I live in the inner suburbs, and I quite agree with all of the things you've said. But I wonder, everyone's so keen on the dollar and the cost of it all. We're faced with a huge development in our suburb, completely inappropriate, and I just cannot see how they expect people to be happy when they put 15 and 16-storey buildings in tiny little residential areas that are just not suitable for them. And it's just inappropriate, and it's developers and money that are so hungry that'll ruin our lifestyle and values in our neighbourhoods and the community values. There'll be them and us, and it'll be a big split.
I think that might be a question in your field, Jonathan, if you want to take it.
I think it's quite interesting. I mean, what I'm kind of looking at the moment is the identities of cities and the collective consciousness of a city. And you know, with identity, people associate with the good and the bad. And you know, when you talk about Melbourne, people will consider, you know, even the traffic. You know, that's part of us. It's what we do. We drive cars, and that's part of the identity. And another is, you know, the quarter-acre block. But we know that has contributed to sprawl. It has. So higher density is going to be part of a sustainable future. But we've got to get the design right. And we won't get that right if it's developer-led. And you only have to go to cities like Auckland, where the planning system is virtually entirely developer-led, to see what can happen to certainly the aesthetics of the city, if not the livability of the city.
A friend of mine is a developer, and it's my understanding that you don't need to do any qualifications to be a developer. Anyone can be a developer. So do we need better restrictions and better planning codes and a kind of a centralised body? Because we've all, I'm sure, seen inappropriate developments put up and thought, how can this possibly pass the guidelines? But technically it does, but spiritually and emotionally and socially it just doesn't. What's the way forth with that? If we've got all these people who are builders, or they're just guys with money, or they're real estate agents, and they can just whack up whatever they want as long as it fits into this kind of basic framework?
Well, certainly cities need very strong building codes to try and manage these things. But eventually, at some stage, they end up in the courts. Or in front of a tribunal.
Or Miley Cyrus and Deveny.
Oh, yeah.
And you know, you end up in a situation. And when I was back in Ireland, I worked for a practice that did a lot of work for developers. And I think now looking back, it's one of the most miserable times of my life. I've sat in tribunals with a developer, and he has hired 10 or 12 consultants to be there on his behalf, and we're up against a group of residents who have themselves, and they've taken a day off work to be there, and they're up against 10 or 12 professionals, and they haven't a chance. What the government or council should be doing is providing them with consultants to argue their case. So I haven't had that experience here, but I imagine it's probably the same. Even with strong building codes, you can find loopholes in the legal system to get around it.
Are there any other questions? We've probably got time for one, possibly two more.
Yeah, thanks for that. Catherine mentioned Rwanda earlier during the discussion. I just wanted to get the panel's opinions on whether the feelings of happiness and joy, whether they differ with ours, people who are in war-torn and poverty-stricken areas in the world.
I think, Anne, David Malouf's article, he focused on the character in Solzhenitsyn's, I've forgotten the book.
A Day in the Life.
A Day in the Life. That sort of touches on that area, because Malouf sort of says that this character is Shukaran managed, even though he was in a gulag, he managed to have an almost happy day. And a lot of people responding to that have said, well, he didn't have a fully happy day, and was he a fool to find that contentment, or was he, as Malouf argues, able to rise above his physical situation and find an inner peace? Would you have thoughts on that?
Well, in the novel he does, it's true. I think it's a bit misleading, though, as the way to use that as an example, because if we have a lot of discussion at the moment of the refugee question, which isn't what Malouf meant, but let me just give an example of people in a detention centre going out of their mind and cutting themselves or wanting to commit suicide because they feel that they will never ever be released from this place. They have no idea when it may be that they have a visa. They have no idea what the processing arrangements are. They feel in a state of sort of Kafkaesque madness and despair. So to invoke that, even though it is possible in the most extreme kind of circumstances, to feel, in contrast to the rest of what is happening to you, that today you got through, because that is actually the point of Solzhenitsyn. He has a bit more, gruel in his soup, and he manages to survive a day. But to, that sense of compared to what, which is really the basis of that, I think it is kind of veering away from what we have to face, which is that there are people in appalling circumstances, that the only way forward is to try and release them from that circumstance. So it can become a very apolitical idea, and there are people around the world, not just in Rwanda, but in all kinds of places that live incredibly suffering and difficult lives. The only thing I would say that sort of is one of the most joyous places I've ever visited is India, and that's despite seeing on the streets and knowing the level of poverty, of physical suffering with people who have absolutely no hospital treatment for all sorts of, but nonetheless it's an astonishingly vivid and vibrant kind of place, and one of the most joyous places I've ever visited. But that said, it's in general a sort of an intact social world. It's not a world out of time. It's not where you're exiled out of your own society and it's not where someone's coming in with a machete and who rapes your sister in front of you and so on. So I think there's indeed, as we think about happiness, there was I've lost my memory, but the one about the Holocaust, where a little boy is hidden in a camp in Italy.
Pyjamas.
A
Beautiful Life, yeah.
Well,
I just found that sentimental and beyond. So I would say, if you want to understand the Holocaust, read Primo Levi. And there are ways in which there are things that happen to human beings for which there are no consolation, for which there is no consolation, and for which all we can do is think about either preventing it happening again or to take political action. So that would be my answer.
Excellent. Well, I think we're out of time. Unfortunately, we ended on not quite a note of happiness as such, but such is the way of these discussions. I don't think you can really talk about happy without mentioning the flip side of the coin. Can you join with me again once more in thanking our fantastic panellists, Catherine Deveny, Jonathan Daly and Anne Manne.
And give a round of applause to Sean Dooley, our beautiful host.
Thank you.